I'm Jeff, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to show you how I made this watercolour seascape. It's a really simple scene, but I used gesso, which is a primer, underneath the sea, so you can see that it creates sort of light areas and you can lift off the paint really easily where there's gesso. I also used some sand just for added texture in the shore. Just adds a really nice element of interest and texture. So this is the gesso. I'm just using a palette knife to put the gesso on the watercolour paper. It's just 300 GSM Bockingford watercolour paper. So I'm just sort of moving the gesso left to right to get it on the paper in thin lines really, and then just manipulating it a bit to get thicker edges. Here I'm just scraping some onto the bottom section, which is going to be the beach, and I'm just sprinkling some sand just to add that extra sort of texture. Just patting it down to push it into the gesso, which is actually really thin layer. I'm just hair drying it now. Usually when I do gesso paintings I leave it to dry overnight because then it's thoroughly dry. So this is the watercolour mix that I'm getting ready for the sea, because I know as soon as I wet the paper and do the sky, by the time I do the sea it'll be getting quite dry, so I thought I'd get the mix ready. Plus you can see where I'm wetting my paper, which I've just done. I'm mixing a sky colour now. I didn't want it really bright blue, so I'm just adding a bit of Payne's grey to the turquoise. They're both Cotman ranges. I've also got crimson and a cadmium yellow. That's all the colours I'm using. I just used water there just to blend out a bit of the sky in the distance, and I've just used scrunched up kitchen roll just to lift out some clouds. So I'm mixing my sea colour a little bit more vividly because I felt that the wash I did earlier was a bit too watery. I added some yellow there. That's a really good way of getting that aqua colour if you want that aqua blue colour. Just add a bit of yellow. Here I'm just adding in some darker inky blue, which is Payne's grey and turquoise, just to get that contrast and the shadows into the sea, just to pick waves really. Now here you can start to see the gesso working. I mean, all I'm doing is putting a wash on there. I'm not lifting out any waves or anything, and the gesso's giving a sort of lightness to the waves because it resists the watercolour watercolour. So where the paper is, it's dark, the wash, and where the gesso is, it's light because it doesn't accept the watercolour paint as much as the paper. It's not as porous. So I'm just putting the sand colour on there. That was just a mixture of the three primaries. You have to be careful not to get it too wet because the gesso will sort of spread a little bit if you keep going over and over and over with a damp brush. And the sand moves as well a little bit, so just less is more when you're brushing it on over the textures. So I'm just putting shadows in here from the sea. I've just got a wet brush and I felt that the headland was the horizon was a little bit too exact for me. I quite like a misty horizon, so I just wetted that and wiped it with a tissue. So I am actually putting darker colours onto the sand here just to bring that added interest. Dark colours naturally come forward, so I usually use darks in the foreground. I'm just blending with a tissue or just water on a brush blends hard lines together. I'm just mixing a headland colour there because I felt like it needed. I mean, this isn't from a picture, it's from my imagination or just inspiration when I've been out visiting places. So it's nowhere specific. But to help balance the sand, I felt it needed a sort of brown coloured headland on the sort of left. I do go back and darken that a little bit more later actually, because watercolour always dries lighter. I find it quite annoying actually how it dries lighter, but yeah, I do go back quite often in my paintings and darken things. So I just felt it needed another colour, so I'm just adding a little bit of green on the top of the headland. Just really loose, trying to keep it not tight at all. I'm starting to lift out the areas where the watercolour's on the gesso now, where I want the white crests of the waves to be. You have to keep washing your brush, because you're basically taking the paint off that's on the gesso onto your brush, and if you want to continually take off the paint, you need to continually wash your brush, keep getting a clean brush. Although my water is quite dirty actually, I could have done with a clean batch of water. I do get a bit lazy with cleaning my water. So here I'm just mixing like I said earlier, I went back and added a darker headland colour. I felt like it needed darkening since I'd darkened the sand. It's always a sort of progress painting. They're always work in progress. You think you've done a bit, and then you do something else and you have to go back and do another bit to the bit you've already done. So that was that. Here I'm just using that colour to darken a little bit down the bottom on the sand. I just felt it needed a little bit more contrast. So I'm going to add some splattering to the waves. I'm using white acrylic and a toothbrush. You do have to wet the toothbrush and the paint just to get the consistency. I always say like single cream consistency. So it's quite wet, but not too wet that the paint disappears. You don't want the paint to be too watery. So with just a little flicking motion, if you get as close as you can to the picture, and then you're not splattering where you don't want it to go. And I'm just dabbing with the brush some of the paint just to fill in some of the gaps. Toothbrush is great for that. And that's the final result. I do add a few birds later, which isn't on camera, but I just felt it needed that extra bit for the focal point. And that's the end result. Gesso and sand with watercolour. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Bye.